We're now in a world where everything is so brutal. Everyone wants instant answers. And if you push for instant answers, you end up with something that becomes like fascism, because it becomes about power. The route that people on the far right are taking us to is a route of us becoming much poorer. We need to find ways of expressing our proud national identity while also embracing other people. Britain feels broken to a lot of people. That isn't a reason to go with Tommy Robinson.
Rory Stewart, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. Now, in this book are articles that you wrote between 2009 and 2019. Are they still relevant in this country now we're in 2025?
Well, I hope so. So these are articles really focused on the most local democracy. I was the MP in Cumbria, Northern Lake District. And I really believe in a moment where we're talking about kind of Trump and geopolitics, that the answer to democracy is to go local and to look at the things that are healthiest and probably most optimistic in Britain, which isn't when you're sitting in London and talking about these big abstract things which dominate the news, but actually finding communities that are fixing, sorting their own things, building affordable housing, getting their own energy built. And that's really what this book is about.
And Middleland, how significant is Middleland to the whole of our country?
Well, I call it a Middleland because Cumbria was an independent kingdom originally. It wasn't part of England or Scotland. But it's also an example of somewhere which isn't really at the centre of policy. Like a lot of Northern England, it's largely neglected. And a lot of the language that people talk about, growth or productivity or even immigration, means something very, very different in somewhere like Cumbria. And I go all the way back to the Romans, who obviously built a huge big wall right through the constituency. People have treated it as though it's empty space. And so it's been a place where nuclear testing happened. It's a place where missile factories were built, munitions factories were built, and more recently, very kind of extravagant environmental schemes, reforesting, huge reservoirs, rewilding. And maybe from London, they think, oh, there's not many people living there, so we can kind of dump up in Cumbria whatever we don't want anywhere near London.
The timescale of your book covers the Brexit referendum, also another huge democratic vote, the Scottish independence vote. What do you think the impact of both of those have been on our country?
Well, the Brexit vote, I think we haven't talked enough about farming because it meant two things. One of them is that all the schemes that the European Union had, which were designed largely, French farmers, Greek farmers, countries that really appreciate how farming is at the heart of their national culture, that take food production seriously, that take their countryside seriously, created this whole policy to support small farmers. And when we left, all the farmers were told, don't worry, we've left the European Union, but you'll still get the money just in a different form. Sure enough, government comes in, it's short of cash, starts cutting the money. Worse than that, it starts putting inheritance tax on farmland. And then we start doing free trade deals with places like Australia, which of course will then produce much cheaper imported meat. And all of that is deeply, deeply dangerous because these farms are not just food producers. They are the people who provide the children in the local schools. They clear the roads in the winter. And they will be replaced by second homeowners and empty wilderness, and we'll lose something which is our last fragile link to the past.
Many farmers did vote for Brexit.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course you're right, many of my farmers did, many of the farmers in the constituency did, and they did it because they were irritated by regulations. They hated being made to kind of measure how wide their hedgerow was to get this subsidy or that subsidy. And I tried at the time to say, be careful what you wish for, because I don't trust British politicians from any party to look after farmers. I actually trust the French and Brussels much more than either Conservative politicians because they're kind of free market nuts, or Labour politicians because they're very urban and not likely to really care about these very complicated small rural economies.
But those farmers didn't listen to you in your constituency?
No.
Right.
The majority of my constituency voted Brexit. I was obviously a big Remain person, yeah.
Now, the the current government, the Labour government, has started to talk a little bit more about Brexit, and they are talking about it through the prism of, look, it has had a lasting, damaging effect on the economy. They are blaming it as we head towards the budget, blaming Brexit as we head towards the budget. What do you think of that strategy?
Well, I agree that Brexit's very damaging, but I also feel pretty cross with them too, because I was a minister under Theresa May, trying to push for a soft Brexit compromise to prevent Boris Johnson coming in and doing a very damaging hard Brexit. And the people who wouldn't vote with us were Labour. And by the end, literally by the end, Theresa May and about 30 of us were crossing the floor saying to Keir Starmer when he was the Brexit minister with Jeremy Corbyn, what do you want here? What kind of deal do you want?
Well, at that stage, they wanted a second referendum. They wanted to overturn the original, didn't they?
They did. And it was always clearly, I thought, ridiculous and unrealistic, and it was never going to happen. And we can see with the benefit of hindsight that they were making the best the enemy of the good. They should have accepted the referendum result and then worked out the best solution, which probably for an area like Cumbria would have been a customs union. And it's the fault, of course, of the hard Brexiteers. There were these famous Spartans in my party, like 20, 30 people who torpedoed every attempt we had to try to get a Brexit deal through. But they were then helped by these ardent Remainers who thought if they could destroy any moderate Brexit deal, they'd get to stay. And the result was we end up with the worst of all worlds.
Identity has been a big conversation in recent weeks, as you know. Would you put a Union flag or a St George's flag on the front of your house?
Well, I'm a Scot, so I'd probably put a...
Oh, right, OK. That was a bad question from me.
No, that's all right.
That was a bad question.
No, but I think it's a good question because as a Scot and a passionate unionist, I really believe that we need to find ways of expressing our proud national identity while also embracing other people and not putting up borders between me and you, not saying because I'm a Scot I'm not British, or that there are other British people who aren't properly British just because I'm emphasising my Scottish identity. I feel, that I'm somebody who was born in Hong Kong, I'm Scottish by identity, but I have Jewish relatives, I've spent a lot of my life in the Middle East, I'm very, very warmly disposed towards Muslim communities in Britain, and I can't see these things as being contradictory. I think there should be a way, and it's something Britain was always traditionally very good at, about being confident of all these things at the same time.
So what's happened? What's changed? And by the way, I'm going to say you do not sound like a Scot. That's my justification.
No, that's good, of course. That's good. That's the other part of British politics, called class politics, cutting in. No, I think one of the things I discovered in the Brexit referendum is that when I came into politics, votes were in the centre ground. If you drew a graph, it was like a bell jar with votes where my fingers are, not where my elbows are. By 2016, it became a U-shape. The votes where my elbows are, on the far left and the far right. And people like me trying to make arguments for, okay, 48% of people have voted Remain, 52% have voted Brexit, so why don't we compromise with a soft Brexit in the middle? Were considered lunatics. And it's really sad, because democracy is about compromise, it's about persuasion, it's about the whole idea of a loyal opposition, where you accept the results of elections, you treat the opposition with respect. I grew up in a politics where, look, I was a Conservative, but when I looked at the Labour benches, I thought, yeah, they might be naive about some things, but I believe they were very well-meaning, good-intentioned people with a different view about economics and how to run society. We're now in a world where everything is so brutal. I'm talking to you on a day where there are these huge issues in the world. I mean, Britain is in big financial trouble. Gaza, Ukraine, which you know better than anyone. And yet, so much of the debate is about Prince Andrew, grooming gangs, and these things are very important, of course, but they should be things that we're talking about with all the other stuff happening in the world.
But we are. We are talking about all the other stuff.
Well, not if you look at the newspapers. It's very striking.
Well, I don't know about the news. I mean,
no, I'm not blaming you. But
hardly anyone reads the newspapers anymore, let's be honest.
I'm not blaming you, but our national conversation has become very focused on sex, on sexual abuse, often on crimes committed 10, 15 years ago, when, meanwhile, Donald Trump is tearing up the world. And I worry we're looking, horrible things happen, but we've got to have the confidence, yes, to address things that went wrong and do them seriously, but also be able to take on those big, big pictures. And the really big one is, how does Britain work with Europe to stand up for big European values in the age of Trump?
You went to Eton, you tutored two princes, Harry and William. You've been a diplomat in the Foreign Office. All very British establishment. Can you see that you might be in a very different place to lots of the people who recently have been putting those flags up on their houses because they're almost trying to get government or people in power to take notice of them?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Do you get that?
I think that's right. I think there's some very good reasons for people to be angry. I think Britain feels broken to a lot of people. But I also feel that that isn't a reason to go with Tommy Robinson. I think there's a way of saying a lot of things aren't working, but to still think the government may be incompetent, may sometimes seem overly politically correct, focused on the wrong issues, but that's not a reason to embrace a convicted criminal with what I see as very, very dangerous views. And this is something that conversations with my friends in the US. More and more people are now being sort of Trump curious. And when I say why, they say, well, all these things are wrong. Look at all these things the Democrats did. Nobody's listening to us. Sure, but this isn't the solution. Going for this more and more extreme, and increasingly people getting impatient with the rule of law, getting impatient with anybody talking about process, anybody talking about doing things properly. Everyone wants instant answers. And if you push for instant answers, you end up with something, that becomes like fascism, because it becomes about power. I'm going to sort this. And then everybody says, well, I like that person because they've sorted this. And when you say, well, but how did they sort this? If I'm talking about Trump, how about the corruption? How about what he's doing to the courts? How about what he's doing to Congress, right? People will say, well, I don't mind about that. He's getting it done. So somewhere in this conversation, yes, of course, people have got every reason to be angry with people like me, partly because we're in a very unequal society. Very, very unequal society in which there's a lot of privilege and a lot of wealth and a lot of things that particularly many, many white communities in Britain can't access. But that's also true for many minority ethnic communities in Britain. It's not a just society, but that's not a reason to go with the extremes, I think. Yeah.
Right, but if it's not a just society, is it therefore down to mainstream politicians, and in this country I'm talking about the Conservatives and Labour, who have failed the country? If people are moving to the extremes.
Yeah, so I guess that there are certain fundamental problems that we have. We have public services like the NHS and care, which are struggling and that need people to work for them. But we don't want immigration. We have an aging population, and yet we don't want to bring younger immigrants in to work. So when Lloyd George set up the welfare state, there were 20 working people for every one retired person. Today there are fewer than 3 working people for every one retired person. It's a big problem. We want housing, but we don't want anyone to build housing anywhere near us. We want to be able to argue about every single detail of HS2 so that we put the price up from 20 billion to 120 billion, burying it under tunnels. And in a sense, this book is partly about this. I mean, my constituents, I was so proud and privileged to be with them, but rereading, a lot of what we were doing was fighting against things, against wind turbines, against developments. So somebody has to have a conversation in Britain to explain that governments have to make these very difficult choices. And you can feel very, very self-righteous, and you can have very good reasons to be saying, I don't want this, I don't want that, but it comes at a cost.
Yeah.
And one of the costs is the economy.
Yeah.
And basically, the route that I believe that people on the far right are taking us to is a route of us becoming much poorer. And that's not going to make a juster society. It's going to be a society without young workers. It's going to be a society without economic growth. It's going to be a society of high taxation. And we've seen those societies. We saw that society in Britain in the 1970s. It doesn't answer anybody's problems.
Right. So why do you say when you say the far right, who are you referring to?
I would put Farage there, because when I see somebody say that I'm going to expel 600,000 or 800,000 people from this country, I'm very troubled.
Okay.
But I'd also am beginning to worry about my own old party, which is a Conservative party. I do not like people saying we're going to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Why? We've had 30 cases to the European Court since 1980. We've won every case in the last 5 years. It's not beyond the wit of man to sort out our immigration while staying in the ECHR. They're just blaming it in the way that they blamed the European Union before. And what they've proved is by leaving the European Union, they didn't fix any of these problems. They'll leave the ECHR, they won't fix any of these problems. It's a lack of drive. They're not getting on with it. You could fix this small boats problem, and they're not fixing it.
I want to ask you, I mean, you talked about, deporting people who've settled here legally. A Conservative MP, a woman called Katie Lamb, who is a shadow Home Office minister, has said in the last couple of days, legally settled families could be deported to make the UK more, quote, culturally coherent. That is someone who is in your old party.
Well, I think it's really shocking. A legally settled family is legally settled. We have a legal system. We're respected all around the world for the rule of law. These are people who've come in good faith to our country. Take all the people who came from Hong Kong. They were told that they could come to this country, they would get legal settled status, they've moved their whole families here, to then turn around and say, we're ripping up the contract that we have with you in order to create whatever they're trying to create.
The phrase was culturally coherent. What do you think that means?
Well, a culturally coherent sounds to me like white British, right? And there's a fundamental problem. We are equal in dignity and rights. People who are legally settled in this country should be completely equal in their rights, regardless of their skin colour, regardless of their cultural practices, right, within the law. I mean, I'm not suggesting terrorism, but my culture is different from your culture. I mean, you were, mocking my background and accent, quite understandably.
I was not mocking it. But, I just said you didn't sound Scottish.
No, that's true. No, but what I mean is that we're all different in Britain, right? We all have different accents, we all come from different places, and that's true within the white British community, that's true of Muslims, it's true of Indian heritage, Brits, that's true of everybody, and has always been. And look into any of our DNA, it's usually much more complicated than we want to acknowledge. I mean, for goodness sake, Robert Jenrick is married, I believe, to an American. I'm married to an American. Jeremy Hunt was, we're all in a much more diverse, mobile society, and rights matter, and the rights relate to us as humans. Humans have rights, not one group, not men against women, rich people against poor people, white people against other people, etc.
Can you ever see yourself returning to the Conservative Party one day?
Not if they continue like this. It's shocking. I mean, this story starts with Brexit. Boris Johnson, for understandable reasons, booted out me, Ken Clarke, Nicholas Soames, David Gauke out the door, and made a loyalty test where you could only run in 2019 if you would sign up to his version of a hard Brexit. Now they're trying to create another loyalty test where you can only run if you sign up to their version of leaving the ECHR. They will end up as a more and more narrow right-wing party, and that is a very bad mistake, because that is a gift to reform. There are all these votes in the centre ground that don't want to vote Labour. Right? Somebody like me doesn't want to vote Labour because I don't trust them on economic policy. So I could imagine a really broad, confident centre-right that says, we believe in business, we believe in low taxes, we believe in small government, we believe in deregulation, but we're also serious about international law, about human rights. We're socially progressive. And I think there are so many people that would vote for that.
So who is that? Who is the party that would speak to that now?
It's gone. It's completely vanished. I can't see it.
It's not the Lib Dems.
It's what Keir Starmer was hoping to be,
right.
I think. But what I think he's found is that his party isn't really with him. That their instincts are not really, in the end, small government, low taxes, and that's part of the struggle. In the end, in their hearts, they are big government, welfare spending, and they're not instinctively in favour of business and the profit motive. I mean, it's slightly unfair, but that's the feeling I get. Right? And the Lib Dems and the Greens are wonderful in many, many ways, but again, you don't get that sense that you have what you had from the Conservative Party for nearly 200 years, which is a sense of consistent economic principles.
Finally, I want to ask you about Gaza, if I may. Obviously, there is a fragile ceasefire at the moment. Can it hold? Can the British do more? Is there anything else, any other way that the British government could help?
Well, I served in Iraq and I was in Afghanistan for 3 years. And I was in the Balkans, Bosnia, Kosovo. And we are forgetting that the key lesson from those places is that everything depends on the legitimacy of the local government, which in this case means Palestinians. The idea that American soldiers or British soldiers or Israeli soldiers are going to somehow rebuild Gaza is very, very dangerous because, and again, Middleland, this book is about this. It's about the fact that politics isn't engineering. It's not just about, I'm a colonel and I've got a bulldozer and I'm going to build this thing. It's about trade-offs. Why are you prioritizing this hospital against that, this school against that? Why is this person getting a job? Why are they not getting a job? And the only people who can answer that are elected people. It's the only mechanism we have, really, for having that conversation, and they need to be local and elected. And the problem with this whole plan is there is no legal framework. The occupation has no legal status. Where is the United Nations Security Council resolution? Where is the elected Palestinian government? Where is the Palestinian Authority? This is a fantasy of Donald Trump and Tony Blair presiding over some technocratic thing that sounds like something out of the 1950s. And it's not how peace came to Northern Ireland. Peace came to Northern Ireland by including civil society, by including women, by including politicians.
Tony Blair, of all people, knows that.
Absolutely, and yet the whole lesson seems to have been lost. I mean, if you said to him, do you really think we got peace in Northern Ireland? Or you would have got it if you'd said that Sinn Féin can't participate, you can't have anything to do with anybody who was in the IRA. Oh, and by the way, there's no space for civil society, there's no space for women. Everything's going to be done by a couple of people from countries 3,000 miles away who are going to come in and run it like a real estate project. Obviously it doesn't work because it's about humans and people and their views.
And you're obviously talking about the Palestinian Authority here. You're obviously not talking about Hamas. Is that correct?
Correct,
yes.
correct. Correct, although it's also important to understand that Hamas are there. And
they're there right now, they're back out on the
just
street.
as the IRA were there in Northern Ireland. And if you try to pursue a policy where you pretend they don't exist, rather than working out how you reintegrate them, how you disarm them, how you demobilize them, how they work within a framework which needs to be led by the Palestinian Authority. You can't have a Hamas government, obviously, right? They're genocidal terrorists. It would be incredibly unimaginable, and Israel would never accept it. But equally, what have we just done in Afghanistan? We spent 20 years, the US and its allies over $1 trillion, $1,000 billion to get rid of the Taliban, to pretend they didn't exist, to say we're not negotiating with terrorists, and then we hand the whole country back to the Taliban again. Why? Because we never developed the local structures of politics.
Why do you think Tony Blair is involved?
I'm afraid he is very excited about fixing world affairs. And it's very tempting to think that in Washington you can come up with great ideas, and there's Jared Kushner, there's Steve Witkoff and the American military, and there's all this power and this money, We're going to fix it. And maybe he hopes that if he can just get a ceasefire, all the good stuff will follow. But it's upside down. You have to negotiate that beforehand. That's why the UN exists. That's why we have an international legal order. That's why we think about elections. In Bosnia and Kosovo, we did it the other way around. You know, we thought about international law, refugee return, trials for war criminals on both sides. Right? Serbs, Croats, and Bosnians, which in this case would be Israelis and Hamas, right?
Okay, we've covered a lot. Thank you very much, Rory Stewart. We really appreciate it. Thank you for talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.